Does President Biden look at these anti-Israel protests on college campuses and think it's nice to see that the country's youth are so involved, or does he think the next generation is doomed?
Here's the thing. There's no place for hate in America. No. I'm telling you.
We hear you guys, though, talk about extremists all the time. It is usually about MAGA extremists. So what about these protesters who are making Jewish students feel unsafe on college campuses? Are they extremists?
I've been very, very clear. We are calling out any form of hate. Any form of hate. It is not acceptable. It should not be acceptable here.
I truly believe that Karine Jean-Pierre is the best representative of any presidential administration in the history of this country ever. Why? Well, because she's incompetent, just like Joe Biden. She has no business being in the job she's in, just like Joe Biden. She has no idea how to do the job she's in, just like Joe Biden. And for some reason, everyone is afraid to tell her so. She doesn't have the self-awareness, just like Joe Biden, to say, okay, I suck at this, I'm going to go home. Instead, she continues trying to do that job as best she can. She's giving it the old college try, and if we're seeing on college campuses, that ain't really all that great of a thing. Well, let's talk a little bit about a question that Peter Doocy asked this genius today, and that question is about, well, hey, what's up with all this anti-Semitism? And believe it or not, Karine Jean-Pierre somehow made that about Donald Trump.
Does Biden think the anti-Israel protesters in this country are extremists?
What I can say is what we've been very clear about this. When it comes to anti-Semitism, there is no place. We have to make sure that we speak against it very loud and be very clear about that.
But you weren't, right? That's why this is sort of an issue for you now, because you weren't very clear about it. Instead, you made it very clear that you thought that the Muslim hate was the big problem, even though there's no one out in the streets chanting death to the Palestinians. Maybe there's a message there about who values life and who doesn't. But you say you must speak out about it at all times, which you don't do. And now here you are again trying to figure out a way to talk about it now, but not say something about Cori Bush or Rashida Tlaib or Ayanna Pressley or Pramila Jayapal. No, instead of the Hamas caucus, you talk about Donald Trump.
Remember, what the president decided when the president decided to run for president is what he saw in Charlottesville in 2017, when he saw neo-Nazis marching down the streets of Charlottesville with vile anti-Semitic just hatred. And he was very clear then, and he's very clear now. He's taken actions against this over the past 2 years, and he's continued to be clear. There is no place for this type of vile and despite this kind of rhetoric.
Then why not call them out by name and make phone calls to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and these other members of the Hamas caucus and make the argument they need to stop saying these things? Why not do that? Why not call them out by name, as I mentioned before? It's not that hard to do. You have no problem calling out something that happened years ago. But you have a real problem calling this out. You won't call them extremists, but, MAGA extremists, that's a real thing, right?
We hear you guys, though, talk about extremists all the time. It is usually about MAGA extremists. So what about these protesters who are making Jewish students feel unsafe on college campuses? Are they extremists?
I've been very, very clear. We are calling out any form of hate. Any form of hate. It is not acceptable. It should not be acceptable here. And we are going to continue to call that out. And let me be very clear. This is a president that has continued to have that fight in his office, in this administration. When he repealed Trump's Muslim ban.
What does that have to do with anything? What does the travel ban have to do with anything? You're implying that's the same thing as telling Jews to get in the gas chambers? I just want to make sure I understand that. Saying they can't come to the country, that's the same thing as going out in the streets and chanting it and yelling it. I mean, could you imagine if people had gone out in the streets and screamed about Muslims not being allowed to come here? How this individual, Karine Jean-Pierre, would have reacted? You saw they reacted to the travel ban. And they're still trying to make it about Trump. This, again, still trying to make it about Trump.
His first day in office. That is something that this president did. He also established an inter-policy committee to counter Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and related forms of bias and discrimination. We have taken this very, very, very seriously.
Look at the headline on the screen. It says, anti-Semitism has no place in America. And here she is again, constantly bringing up Islamophobia, Islamophobia, Islamophobia. Where is the Islamophobia? There's been one incident that we can reference with a guy in Chicago stabbing a 6-year-old because they got in a fight with the mother over this war. Call that Islamophobia if you want to. That's fine. Let's own that. That's Islamophobia. It's wrong, and everyone should call that out. And everyone has. But again, you keep trying to equate this. This is just like the whole Stop Asian Hate thing. Except it's actually happening. It's not just some made-up thing that largely isn't happening, except in big urban cities. It's not happening everywhere. This is happening everywhere. On college campuses, there were not any anti-Asian rallies. You just had thugs beating up Asians and screaming racial slurs at them. This is organized. This is totally different. And there's nothing even remotely comparable, even after 9/11, to what we're seeing right now. In fact, we had people after 9/11 who were having anti-war protests because it was going to be in Muslim countries. So this doesn't make any sense here.
From the president all the way on down.
Does President Biden look at these anti-Israel protests on college campuses and think it's nice to see that the country's youth are so involved, or does he think the next generation is doomed?
Here's the thing. There's no place for hate in America. No. I'm telling you, there's no place for hate in America, and we condemn any anti-Semitic threat or incident in the strongest terms. And you heard me say at the top, I gave a message to students who are feeling under threat right now, right? You know, we're tracking these threats very closely. We are there for them. No student should have to be able to go to class, live on campus in fear. And, you know, these incidents, these reported anti-Semitic incidents at schools and on campuses, that should not be.
You'll notice she can't bring herself to criticize the people actually doing it. It's very strange. She can't do it. He's given her time after time after time and time again. She'll say it's bad, because obviously it is, but she can't bring herself to criticize the people doing it. Why? Because they're them. They're their fellow travelers. We're hearing about the people in the Biden administration mad about the support for Israel. The same thing that's happening on these college campuses. They're them. They're terrible, awful, no good people. And they're completely okay with this. They want the war to stop because they care more about the Palestinians than they do the Jews. Period. That's it. They don't care who the aggressor is in this case. They don't care that Hamas has the support of the Palestinian people, that a vast majority of the Palestinians support attacks on Israeli civilians. This is not new stuff. This has been going on forever. And she still can't bring herself to call it out. It's pathetic. But like I said, she represents Joe Biden pretty well. She's terrible. She's meek. She makes America weaker. And she is just generally a pathetic person.